"Get out of my showroom, you filthy grease monkey." Derek Sullivan's voice sliced through the pristine air like a blade through silk. He grabbed the elderly man's worn jacket and shoved him violently toward the glass doors. "You think you can just walk in here smelling like motor oil and touching our $85,000 motorcycles with those disgusting hands? This is Arch Motorcycle, not the junkyard you crawled out of. We serve real customers here, not washed-up mechanics who should have retired decades ago. People like you make me absolutely sick." The old man stumbled backward, clutching a small velvet pouch to his chest as if it contained his very soul. And in the corner, a scruffy figure in a faded hoodie lowered his coffee cup, his famous brown eyes darkening with a fury that would soon change everything. The California sun hung low over the hills of Hawthorne, casting long golden shadows across the sleek facade of Arch Motorcycle's flagship showroom. The building itself was a testament to modern design, all glass and steel and carefully curated industrial aesthetics that spoke of precision engineering and uncompromising craftsmanship. The architecture had won awards, been featured in design magazines, and attracted visitors from around the world who came simply to admire the space where these extraordinary machines were displayed. Inside, 6 motorcycles stood on elevated platforms like sculptures in a museum of mechanical art. Each one was illuminated by carefully positioned spotlights that made the chrome gleam and the carbon fiber shimmer with an almost otherworldly beauty. The KRGT-1, with its muscular stance and aggressive lines. The Method 143, a limited edition masterpiece that combined raw power with refined elegance. The once, designed for riders who demanded nothing less than perfection in every component. These were not ordinary motorcycles. They were rolling works of art, hand-built by master craftsmen who understood that true excellence could not be rushed or mass-produced. Each machine represented thousands of hours of meticulous attention to detail, countless iterations of design and engineering, and an unwavering commitment to creating something that transcended mere transportation. The price tags reflected this extraordinary nature. $85,000, $120,000. For the most exclusive custom builds, the numbers climbed even higher, reaching into territories that most people could only dream about. This was not a place for casual browsers or curious tourists. This was a temple dedicated to the marriage of form and function, where dreams took shape in carbon fiber and titanium, where passion and precision combined to create machines that could take your breath away. At least, that was what Derek Sullivan believed with every fiber of his being. The 32-year-old showroom manager stood near the reception desk, his tailored charcoal suit perfectly pressed, his Italian leather shoes polished to a mirror shine that reflected the spotlights above. A silk tie in deep burgundy provided the perfect accent, and his hair was styled with the kind of precision that suggested regular appointments at an expensive salon. He surveyed his domain with the proprietary satisfaction of someone who had clawed his way up from nothing, and now stood guard over everything he had fought to achieve. His eyes swept across the showroom with practiced efficiency, noting the position of every motorcycle, the cleanliness of every surface, the professional demeanor of every employee. Derek had worked at Arch Motorcycle for 4 years, starting as a junior sales associate fresh out of business school. He had risen through the ranks through a combination of aggressive salesmanship, ruthless efficiency, and an almost obsessive attention to the details that separated adequate performance from exceptional results. He knew every specification of every model by heart. He could recite performance statistics in his sleep, debate the merits of different suspension systems with genuine passion, and explain the engineering philosophy behind every design choice with the confidence of someone who had studied these machines until they became extensions of his own identity. More importantly, he had closed deals, big deals. He had sold motorcycles to celebrities whose names appeared regularly in tabloid headlines. He had negotiated with tech billionaires who thought nothing of dropping 6 figures on a machine they might ride twice a year. He had charmed professional athletes, entertained foreign dignitaries, and cultivated relationships with collectors who viewed these motorcycles as investments rather than vehicles. These were his people, the successful, the wealthy, the elite members of society who had earned the right to own machines this extraordinary through their achievements and accomplishments. not the man who had just walked through the door. Walter Gibson was 58 years old, with a weathered face that told the story of decades spent under harsh fluorescent lights in cramped garage bays, under the unforgiving California sun while working on cars in outdoor lots, under the strain of physical labor that never seemed to end, no matter how many years passed. His hands were permanently stained with the ghosts of 1,000 oil changes, 10,000 brake jobs, countless hours spent reaching into the mechanical hearts of automobiles to diagnose problems and coax dying engines back to life. The creases in his palms held traces of grease that no amount of scrubbing could ever fully remove, and his fingernails, though clean, bore the permanent discoloration of someone who had worked with petroleum products for most of his adult life. He wore clean but faded blue jeans, the kind that came from years of washing rather than the artificial distressing sold at expensive boutiques. A simple plaid flannel shirt in shades of blue and gray covered his lean frame, and work boots that had seen better days, but were still perfectly functional, carried him across the polished concrete floor. But his eyes, those pale blue eyes that had witnessed so much joy and sorrow over nearly 6 decades of living, they shone with a light that had nothing to do with wealth or status or social standing. They held the brightness of a man who still believed in dreams, who still carried hope in his heart despite everything life had thrown at him. Walter paused just inside the entrance, taking in the showroom with the reverent appreciation of someone who truly understood what he was looking at. This was not the casual glance of a tourist snapping photographs for social media. This was the focused attention of a man who had spent his entire life working on machines, who understood the difference between ordinary manufacturing and genuine craftsmanship. His gaze traveled slowly from motorcycle to motorcycle, drinking in the curves and angles, the perfect welds and flawless finishes, the way light played across surfaces that had been shaped by human hands, rather than stamped out by automated factories. A small smile played at the corners of his weathered lips, growing wider with each machine he examined. Beautiful, he whispered to himself, his voice filled with genuine awe. Just beautiful. Linda, you should see these. You would love them. In his left hand, he clutched a small velvet pouch, deep purple and worn soft from constant handling. The fabric had faded in spots where his fingers had rubbed against it countless times, seeking comfort in its presence. He pressed it against his chest as he walked deeper into the showroom, approaching the nearest motorcycle with the cautious reverence of a pilgrim approaching a sacred shrine. Derek watched the old man's approach with mounting disgust that twisted his handsome features into something ugly. The flannel shirt, the work boots, the calloused hands reaching toward the pristine chrome of the KRGT1's handlebars with fingers that had no business touching anything this valuable. "Excuse me," Derek called out, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. He strode across the showroom floor with the purposeful gait of someone defending territory from an invader. "Can I help you with something?" Walter turned, his smile widening at the attention. He was accustomed to being ignored in places like this, so any acknowledgement felt like progress. "Yes, thank you kindly," he said, his voice carrying the warm tones of someone who had spent his life treating others with courtesy regardless of their station. "I am here to buy a motorcycle." Derek's laugh was short, harsh, and utterly devoid of warmth. It echoed off the glass walls like a gunshot, causing the other employees to look up from their stations with expressions of uncomfortable recognition. They had heard that laugh before. It never preceded anything good. "I think you might be in the wrong place, friend." Derek loaded the final word with enough condescension to make clear it was anything but friendly. "There is a Harley dealership about 3 miles down the road, much more suited to your budget and your appearance, and frankly, your entire situation." The condescension dripped from every word like poison from a snake's fangs. Walter's smile faltered slightly, but he held his ground with the quiet dignity of someone who had faced worse treatment and survived. "No, I believe I am in the right place. I have been saving for this for a very long time. Longer than you might imagine, young man." He took a breath, steeling himself to share something precious with this dismissive stranger. "My wife and I, we always dreamed of owning an arch motorcycle. We saw one in a magazine 30 years ago, back when the company was just getting started, and we said to each other, one day One day we will ride across America on a machine like that, just the two of us, seeing all the places we never had time to visit when we were young and busy raising our boys." He paused, his voice catching on something painful that lurked beneath the surface of his words. "We were going to do it together. That was always the plan. Together? Your wife." Derek glanced around the showroom with theatrical exaggeration, making a show of searching for someone who clearly was not there. "I do not see anyone with you. Did she get lost in the parking lot? Or did she take one look at this place and realize neither of you belonged here?" Walter's hand tightened around the velvet pouch until his knuckles went white. "She passed away 2 years ago. Cancer. It started in her breast, spread to her lymph nodes, and then it was everywhere. Nothing the doctors did could stop it. She fought for 3 years, never complained, never gave up hope until the very end." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "But I promised her, before she went, that I would still make the trip. That I would take her with me." He held up the small pouch, and Derek's eyes widened with revulsion as understanding dawned across his face. "You brought her, Shiz, into my showroom." The disgust in his voice was palpable, filling the space between them like something toxic. "You actually carried a dead person into a place of business." "She wanted to see the motorcycles," Walter said softly, his eyes glistening but his voice steady. "She always loved beautiful machines, ever since we were young. I thought maybe, if I brought her here, she could finally see the ones we dreamed about for so long. I thought she would have wanted to be part of choosing the one that would carry us across the country." "Get out." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shocked silence across the showroom. Walter blinked, confusion clouding his weathered features. "I am sorry. I do not think I heard you correctly. I said get out." Derek stepped closer, his perfectly polished shoes clicking against the concrete floor like the countdown to an explosion. "This is a professional establishment. We maintain certain standards here. We cater to serious buyers, successful people, individuals who have actually made something of themselves, not sentimental old men carrying around dead relatives in their pockets like some kind of morbid good luck charm." "But I am a serious buyer," Walter protested, reaching into his back pocket with a hand that trembled only slightly. "I have the money right here. All of it. $85,000. I have been saving for 30 years, ever since Linda and I first saw one of these motorcycles in that magazine." He pulled out a thick envelope, worn and creased from being handled countless times, from being opened and counted and carefully closed again over years of patient accumulation. He held it toward Derek like an offering, like proof of his worthiness to be treated as a human being. "Every extra penny from every overtime shift I ever worked, every birthday present I asked to receive in cash instead of gifts, every Christmas bonus, every tax refund, it is all here. I counted it this morning, 3 times. Just to be sure, $85,427. More than enough for the motorcycle I want." Derek stared at the envelope with naked contempt, as if Walter were offering him something contaminated rather than the accumulated savings of a lifetime. "You expect me to believe that a mechanic saved $85,000. He spat the word mechanic like it tasted foul in his mouth. "What did you do? Steal it from the register at your little garage? Overcharge customers who did not know any better? Or maybe you found it in some dead man's mattress and decided to spend it on yourself instead of reporting it like an honest person would?" Walter's face flushed with shame and anger, the blood rising to his weathered cheeks in a tide of indignation. "I never stole anything in my life. Not a single penny. I earned every dollar in this envelope through honest work. 40 years of honest work. 40 years of showing up early and staying late, of doing the job right the first time, of treating every customer's car like it was my own. 40 years. Derek's smile was cruel, a predator's grin that showed too many teeth. 40 years of changing oil and rotating tires and crawling around under other people's cars, and this is all you have to show for it. That is not admirable, old man. That is pathetic. That is the definition of a wasted life." The word hung in the air between them, sharp and poisonous. "I was a mechanic," Walter said quietly, his voice trembling but firm with a dignity that Derek's cruelty could not quite extinguish. "I am not ashamed of that. Not one bit. I kept people's cars running so they could get to work and earn their livings. So they could take their kids to school and pick them up again. So they could visit their families on holidays, drive their daughters to wedding venues, rush to hospitals when loved ones were sick. He lifted his chin, meeting Derek's contemptuous gaze with steady eyes. That matters. That means something. Every car I fixed was a family I helped. Every engine I rebuilt was a life I made a little bit easier. You might not think that is important, but I do. And Linda did. She was proud of me every single day of our marriage. Derek's face contorted with a rage that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the present moment, from some wound that had never healed properly and now festered beneath his polished exterior. Proud. She was proud that her husband spent his life doing work that anyone with half a brain could do. She was proud that you never had the ambition or the intelligence to make something of yourself. She was proud to be married to a man who came home every day smelling like gasoline and transmission fluid. He stepped even closer, invading Walter's personal space with aggressive intent. Let me tell you something, old man. People like you are the reason people like me had to work so hard to escape our circumstances. You are content to be nothing, to achieve nothing, to die with nothing but a rusty toolbox and some sad memories. And now you walk into me, showroom, smelling like a garage, touching machines you have no business being near, and you expect me to treat you like a valued customer. Derek grabbed Walter's worn jacket by the collar, his fingers twisting in the faded fabric with violent force. Get out of my showroom, you filthy grease monkey. You think you can just walk in here smelling like motor oil and touching our $85,000 motorcycles with those disgusting hands. This is Arch Motorcycle, not the junkyard you crawled out of. We serve real customers here, not washed-up mechanics who should have retired decades ago. People like you make me absolutely sick. He began shoving Walter toward the exit, pushing him backward step by stumbling step. And take your dead wife with you. This is a place of business, not a cemetery. We do not need your kind bringing your grief and your poverty and your sad little dreams into a space reserved for people who actually matter. Walter stumbled backward, clutching the velvet pouch containing Linda's ashes against his chest with desperate strength. His envelope of savings fell from his grasp, hitting the polished floor and bursting open. Bills scattered across the concrete like fallen leaves in an autumn storm. The accumulated dreams of 30 years spreading out in a sad green carpet that other employees could only stare at in horrified silence. Please, Walter gasped. You do not understand. My wife, she wanted. I do not care about your wife, Derek shouted, his face contorted with a fury that had long since lost any connection to the present situation. I do not care about your savings or your dreams or your precious little road trip. You are not welcome here. You will never be welcome here. You are nothing but a reminder of everything I never wanted to be. He shoved Walter one final time with all his strength, sending the old man stumbling through the glass doors and onto the sidewalk outside. Walter's legs tangled beneath him and he fell hard, his hip striking the concrete with a sound that made everyone who heard it wince. The doors swung closed with a pneumatic hiss, sealing the showroom off from the man who had dared to dream above his station. Inside, Derek stood breathing heavily, his chest heaving as if he had just run a marathon. He straightened his tie with shaking hands, smoothed his hair back into place, and tried to compose the professional facade that had cracked so completely moments before. The other employees stood frozen at their stations. Jennifer, the young woman at the reception desk, had tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Marcus and David, two sales associates who had witnessed the entire confrontation, exchanged looks of profound discomfort but said nothing. They had all seen Derek's temper before, had all learned that challenging him meant risking their own positions. Someone clean up this mess, Derek snapped, gesturing at the scattered bills on the floor with obvious disgust. And if any of you ever let someone like that through the front door again, you will be joining him on the unemployment line. We have standards here. We have a reputation to maintain. I will not have it destroyed by every charity case who wanders in off the street. He turned and strode toward his office, never noticing the scruffy figure in the worn hoodie who had been sitting quietly in the corner throughout the entire confrontation. The man lowered his coffee cup, revealing a face that would have been instantly recognizable to anyone who paid attention to Hollywood blockbusters or, for that matter, to the motorcycle industry, where he was known as one of the founders of the very company whose showroom they occupied. Long dark brown hair fell past his shoulders, slightly disheveled and unwashed, giving him the appearance of someone who had not bothered with grooming for several days. 3 days of stubble covered a jaw that had graced countless movie posters, magazine covers, and entertainment news features. Warm brown eyes, usually gentle and contemplative, now burned with a cold fury that transformed his entire bearing. Keanu Reeves set down his cup with careful deliberation and rose slowly from his seat. He had come to the showroom today for a simple reason that he undertook periodically at all his business ventures. He wanted to see how his employees treated customers when they did not know the boss was watching. He wanted to observe the genuine culture of the place, not the performance that people put on when they knew they were being evaluated. So he had dressed down deliberately, wearing his oldest hoodie with a small tear near the pocket, faded jeans that had been washed so many times they were soft as cotton sheets, and boots that were scuffed and worn from years of actual use. He wanted to blend into the background, to become invisible, to see the truth that hid behind professional smiles and corporate policies. What he had witnessed made his blood run cold. But Keanu was not a man who acted on impulse, not anymore. He had learned through decades of loss and hardship that anger, however justified, rarely led to wisdom. He had learned that the immediate satisfaction of confrontation often gave way to the longer-term regret of words spoken in heat that could never be taken back. So instead of storming into Derek's office and firing him on the spot, instead of causing a scene that would only add to the trauma Walter had already experienced, Keanu walked quietly toward the exit. He slipped through the glass doors into the California afternoon, his sneakers making no sound on the polished concrete. Walter Gibson sat on the curb outside the showroom, his weathered face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside his chest. The velvet pouch containing his wife's ashes rested on the concrete beside him, and a few stray bills that had followed him outside fluttered in the gentle breeze, ignored and abandoned. Keanu approached slowly, not wanting to startle the grieving man, and lowered himself onto the curb beside him. His joints protested slightly at the movement, a reminder that he was no longer as young as he sometimes felt, but he settled into position with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to be. "May I sit with you?" he asked quietly, his voice gentle and undemanding. Walter looked up, his eyes red and swollen from crying, and nodded without really seeing the stranger beside him. In his current state of devastation, one person was much like another. What did it matter who witnessed his humiliation? "It does not matter anymore," Walter said, his voice hollow with defeat. "Nothing matters. I am just a foolish old man who should have known better than to dream." "I saw what happened in there," Keanu said. "I was sitting in the corner the whole time. I saw everything that man did to you, and I heard everything he said." Walter laughed bitterly, a sound without any humor in it. "Then you saw me get exactly what I deserved for thinking I could walk into a place like that. A mechanic buying a motorcycle that costs more than most cars. What was I thinking? I am sorry you were treated that way," Keanu continued, his voice carrying a weight of genuine empathy. "No one deserves to be spoken to like that. No one deserves to be thrown out of anywhere for wanting to buy something they can afford. 30 years. Walter's voice cracked on the number, breaking apart like something fragile that had finally shattered. 30 years of saving, of dreaming, of promising Linda that one day we would ride across America on a motorcycle just like those. Every time money got tight, every time we needed a new roof, or the boys needed braces, or the car broke down, we would look at each other and say, not yet, but someday. Someday we will have our adventure. He picked up the velvet pouch and cradled it against his chest like a baby, like something infinitely precious that needed protection from a cruel world. And for what? To be called a grease monkey. To be told I am not good enough. To be thrown onto the sidewalk like garbage while strangers watch and do nothing. His tears fell onto the velvet, darkening the purple fabric in small spots. I just wanted to give her this one last thing. This one last adventure we always talked about. Is that so wrong? Is it so terrible to want to honor your wife's memory? Keanu was quiet for a long moment, watching the California sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed too beautiful for a moment filled with such pain. When he spoke, his voice was soft with a sadness that came from deep personal experience, from wounds that had never fully healed. Tell me about Linda. Walter looked at the stranger beside him, really looked for the first time, and something in those gentle brown eyes made him want to share. There was no judgment there, no condescension, no pity, just genuine interest and a kindness that felt almost foreign after what he had just experienced. We met when we were 17, Walter began, a ghost of a smile crossing his weathered features despite the tears still wet on his cheeks. At a gas station, if you can believe it. The old Chevron on the corner of Main and Fifth, the one that got torn down years ago to build a strip mall. He stared into the middle distance, seeing not the present moment, but a day 4 decades past. I was working the pumps during summer break, trying to save money for community college. Hottest day of the year, must have been 105 in the shade, and I was covered in sweat and probably smelled like gasoline and teenage desperation. His smile grew a little wider at the memory. And then this ancient Chevy pulled up, a 1967 Impala that had seen better days, making the most terrible noise I had ever heard. Sounded like someone was inside the engine with a bag of marbles and a grudge. The driver was this girl about my age, with red hair and green eyes and freckles across her nose. And she looked at me through that open window like I was the answer to every prayer she had ever prayed. He laughed softly, the sound mingling with his tears. She said, "Please tell me you can fix this. I am supposed to be at my grandmother's birthday party in 2 hours, and this car sounds like it is dying." I told her the engine was indeed about to give up the ghost, that she had a cracked head gasket and worn piston rings, and about 6 other problems that had been ignored for way too long. Keanu listened in silence, understanding instinctively that some stories needed to be told without interruption, that the telling itself was a form of healing. She looked at me with those big green eyes, and I swear my heart just stopped right there in my chest. And she said, "Well then, I guess you better fix it. I cannot miss my grandmother's party. She is turning 80, and she says this might be her last one, though she has been saying that for 10 years now." Walter shook his head at the memory, marveling at how a single moment could change the entire trajectory of a life. That was Linda. Always so direct, so sure of what she wanted, so certain that the universe would provide if she just asked clearly enough. I told her there was no way I could fix all those problems in 2 hours, that it would take days of work and parts I did not have. He paused, savoring what came next, and she said, "Then I guess you better get started, because I am not going anywhere until this car runs well enough to get me to my grandmother's house." She climbed out, walked over to an oil drum in the shade, sat down, and started telling me about her plans to become a teacher while I worked. "And you fixed it?" Keanu asked. "I spent 3 hours working on that car while she sat there and talked." Walter confirmed. "I did what I could with what I had, enough to get her to her grandmother's party and back. And by the time I had her engine running smooth enough to make the trip, I knew 2 things with absolute certainty." He turned to look at Keanu directly, his blue eyes bright despite the tears. "I knew I was going to marry her, and I knew I was going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of her love." "And did you?" "Marry her, I mean. 6 months later, the day after my 18th birthday. We did not have any money, could not afford a proper wedding with flowers and a cake, and all those things girls dream about. So we got married at the courthouse downtown, just us and 2 friends as witnesses, and we spent our honeymoon camping at Joshua Tree, because it was the only trip we could afford." Walter's voice grew thick with emotion, but his smile remained. She said it was the happiest weekend of her life. Said she did not need a fancy wedding or an expensive honeymoon, that all she needed was me and the stars and the open road ahead of us. She said, "Walter, as long as we are together, everywhere is paradise." He pressed the velvet pouch closer to his heart. 40 years. We had 40 years together. We raised 2 boys who grew into good men with families of their own. We watched them graduate high school and college, watched them get married and have children, became grandparents together. And through all of it, through the hard times when money was tight and the good times when we had a little extra, we always talked about one day buying a motorcycle and riding across America. Why a motorcycle? Keanu asked. Why not an RV or a car? Something more comfortable for a long trip. Freedom. Walter said simply, as if that single word explained everything. Linda always said that riding a motorcycle was the closest thing to flying while keeping your feet on the ground. She said you could feel the world around you in a way that was impossible when you were sealed inside a car. The wind, the sun, the smell of different places as you passed through them. She said it was like being part of the landscape instead of just looking at it through a window. He gazed at the distant hills, seeing something that existed only in memory. She grew up poor, you know. Really poor, not just tight budget poor. Her father left when she was young, and her mother worked 2 jobs just to keep them fed. They lived in a series of small apartments, moving every time the rent went up, never staying anywhere long enough to feel like home. Keanu nodded slowly, recognizing echoes of his own childhood in the story. But she had dreams, Walter continued. Big, beautiful dreams of wide-open roads and endless horizons. She wanted to see the Grand Canyon at sunset, watch the colors change across those ancient walls. She wanted to drive through the Rocky Mountains in spring, when the snow was still on the peaks but the valleys were green with new growth. She wanted to stand on a beach in Maine and watch the Atlantic Ocean stretch out forever, wanted to feel small in the face of something that vast and eternal. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. She never got to see any of it. Every time we got close to having enough saved for the trip, something would come up. The roof needed replacing. One of the boys broke his arm, and the medical bills ate through our savings. The garage where I worked closed down, and I was out of a job for 3 months. He shook his head at the cruel mathematics of poverty, at how the dreams of working people were always one emergency away from collapse. By the time I had finally saved enough money, by the time we were both retired and free and ready to go, the cancer came. Started as a lump she found in the shower one morning. By the time she went to the doctor, by the time they did all the tests and scans and biopsies, it had already spread. Walter's tears flowed freely now, unchecked and unashamed. 3 years of fighting, 3 years of chemotherapy and radiation and experimental treatments that insurance did not cover. 3 years of watching the strongest woman I ever knew grow weaker and weaker, losing her hair and her appetite and eventually her ability to walk. He took a shuddering breath. She died in my arms on a Tuesday morning in April, with the sunrise coming through the window of our bedroom and the birds singing in the tree outside. Her last words to me were, "Take the trip, Walter. Take me with you and show me all the beautiful things we never got to see together. Promise me." "And you promised," Keanu said softly. I promised. I held her hand and looked into those green eyes that I had loved for 40 years, and I swore to her that I would make our dream come true, even if she could not be there in body to share it. He held up the velvet pouch. So I saved the rest of the money. Took me 2 more years of working overtime, 2 more years of skipping lunches and selling things we did not need anymore, 2 more years of putting every spare penny into that envelope. And when I finally had enough, I came here. Walter looked at the showroom behind them, at the glass and steel temple he had been so unceremoniously ejected from. I thought Arch Motorcycle was perfect. The craftsmanship, the attention to detail, the beauty of those machines. Linda would have loved them. She would have run her fingers over every curve, asked 1,000 questions about how they were built, demanded to know the story behind every design choice. His voice broke. But I guess I was fooling myself. A man like me has no business dreaming about things like that. Maybe that man in there was right. Maybe I am just a grease monkey who should know his place. Why do you say that? Keanu asked, though he already knew the answer and hated it, because he was right about everything else, was he not? Walter's voice was hollow with defeat. I am just a mechanic. I did spend my whole life covered in grace, fixing other people's cars so they could live their dreams while I put mine on hold year after year. What right do I have to walk into a place like that and pretend I belong? Keanu was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts, preparing to share something he rarely spoke about with strangers. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of personal experience that made Walter look up in surprise. "My father left when I was 3 years old," Keanu said. "I barely remember him. Just fragments, really. The smell of cigarettes and beer, a hand that was sometimes gentle and sometimes not. The sound of the door closing behind him for the last time. And then he was gone, vanished from my life like he had never existed at all, and it was just my mother trying to hold everything together." Walter listened in silence, sensing that this scruffy stranger was sharing something deeply personal, something that caused him to speak aloud. "We moved around a lot when I was young. Australia for a while, then New York, then Toronto. Never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots, never feeling like we really belonged in any of the places we lived. I learned early that the world was not going to give me anything just because I deserved it. That the only way to make something of yourself was to work harder than everyone else and never, ever be ashamed of where you came from." He turned to face Walter directly, his brown eyes warm with understanding. "Do you know what I learned from those years? I learned that the people who work with their hands, the mechanics and the carpenters and the electricians and the welders and the plumbers and all the others who keep the world running, they are the backbone of everything. Without them, all the fancy showrooms and expensive machines and wealthy customers would not exist. Without them, civilization itself would grind to a halt." Walter stared at the stranger, something stirring in his chest. "Who are you?" Keanu reached out and placed his hand on Walter's shoulder, a gesture of connection and solidarity. "I am someone who understands loss," he said. "I lost my best friend when we were both too young to understand that life could be so fragile, so easily extinguished. I lost a daughter who never had the chance to draw her first breath, who existed for 9 months of hope, and then was gone. I lost someone I loved more than I ever thought possible, taken from me in a way that seemed impossibly cruel." His voice carried the weight of decades of grief, processed but never fully resolved. "And I am someone who believes that every person who walks through those doors," he nodded toward the showroom, "deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of what they look like or how much money they have or what kind of work they do, because that is not just good business. It is basic human decency." He stood up and extended his hand to Walter. "Come back inside with me, please. I want to show you something." Walter hesitated, glancing at the showroom with obvious fear. The memory of his humiliation was still fresh, still raw, still burning in his chest like acid. "But that man, he said if I came back." "That man does not speak for Arch Motorcycle," Keanu said firmly, with a certainty that went beyond mere confidence. "Trust me on this, please." Something in his voice, some quiet authority that seemed completely at odds with his shabby appearance, made Walter take the offered hand and rise to his feet. He bent down to gather the velvet pouch, pressing it against his chest once more, and followed the stranger back toward the glass doors. They walked back into the showroom together, the scruffy stranger in the worn hoodie and the grieving mechanic with his wife's ashes clutched to his heart. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Derek Sullivan looked up from his desk with immediate outrage. "What part of Get Out did you not understand, old man?" His voice rose to a shout as he lunged to his feet. "I told you that you were not welcome here! I am calling security right now, and then I am calling the police to have you arrested for trespassing!" He reached for his phone, already dialing, but froze when the scruffy stranger stepped forward. "That will not be necessary, Derek." Derek's eyes narrowed with contempt. "Who the hell are you? This is a private business. You need to leave immediately, both of you, or I will have you dragged out by force." Keanu pushed back the hood of his sweatshirt, revealing his face in full for the first time. The recognition was instantaneous. Derek's phone clattered to the desk. His face went from red with anger to white with horror in the span of a single heartbeat. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound emerged except a strangled gasp. "Mr. Reeves," he finally managed to stammer. "I did not. I had no idea you were. I never would have, if I had known." "I know you did not," Keanu said quietly, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. That was rather the point. He stepped closer to Derek's desk, his movements slow and deliberate. giving the young manager time to fully comprehend the magnitude of what he had done. I founded Arch Motorcycle with my friend Guard because we believed in something, Keanu said. We believed that motorcycles could be more than just transportation, more than just status symbols, more than just expensive toys for wealthy people to show off. We believed they could be art. They could be dreams made tangible. They could connect people to something larger than themselves, to the freedom of the open road and the pure joy of movement. He gestured toward Walter, who stood trembling near the entrance. That man came here today with a dream he had shared with his wife for 30 years. A dream that survived her death and drove him to save every penny he could spare, working with his hands, doing honest labor, so that one day he could make that dream come true. Derek's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. And what did you do, Derek? You called him a grease monkey. You threw his money on the floor. You mocked his dead wife and threw him out onto the street like garbage. You humiliated him in front of everyone here, and you did it with pleasure. Sir, I was just trying to maintain the image of the brand, Derek stammered desperately. We have a certain clientele, a certain standard, and I thought, Mage of the brand. Keanu's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his controlled composure. Do you know what this brand was built on? It was built on passion and craftsmanship and the love of beautiful machines. It was built on the belief that anyone who shares that passion deserves to be welcomed here. Not just people who look a certain way or dress a certain way or come from a certain background. He knelt down and began picking up the scattered bills from the floor, gathering them carefully, respectfully, one by one. $85,000, 30 years of savings, every extra shift, every skip vacation, every small sacrifice made in service of a dream. And you treated it like garbage. You treated him like garbage. Derek was visibly shaking now. Please, Mr. Reeves, I can explain. I was just trying to protect the company's reputation. We cannot have just anyone walking in here and... Explain what? Keanu turned to face him fully, and the gentleness in his eyes had been replaced by something much harder. Explain why you treated another human being as less than human. Explain why you looked at a man who has worked hard his entire life and decided he was not good enough for your showroom. I did not mean. I just thought. What did you think, Derek? That only certain people deserve to be treated with respect. That a man's worth is determined by his clothing or his job title or the cleanliness of his fingernails. Derek's composure finally shattered completely. His shoulders slumped, his head bowed, and something that looked almost like tears gathered in the corners of his eyes. What came out of his mouth next shocked everyone in the room. My father was a mechanic. The words hung in the air like a confession, like something shameful finally being dragged into the light. What did you say? Keanu asked, his voice softening slightly at the unexpected admission. My father, Thomas Sullivan. He was a mechanic his whole life. Worked at the same shop for 32 years, from the time he was 18 until the day he died. He came home every night with grease under his fingernails and oil stains on his clothes. His hands were always rough, always calloused, always marked by the work he did. Derek's voice cracked, and the polished facade crumbled away to reveal something raw and wounded underneath. He worked so hard. Double shifts when the shop was busy. Weekends when other fathers were at their kids' baseball games. Holidays when everyone else was celebrating with their families. Also, he could save enough money to send me to college. Also, I could have a better life than he had, a life where I did not have to crawl under cars and come home smelling like engine exhaust. Walter stepped forward, drawn by the pain in the young man's voice despite everything Derek had done to him. When I was in high school, I was ashamed of him. Derek continued, the words pouring out like water from a broken dam. My friends' fathers were lawyers and doctors and executives. They drove Mercedes and BMWs and lived in big houses in the nice neighborhoods. They wore suits to work and came home with clean hands and took their families on vacations to Hawaii and Europe. Tears were streaming down Derek's face now, cutting tracks through the veneer of professionalism he usually wore like armor. And my father came to my football games in his work clothes because he did not have time to go home and change between his shift and kickoff. He sat in the stand smelling like motor oil while all the other dads sat there in their pressed khakis and polo shirts. He cheered louder than anyone when I scored a touchdown, and I pretended not to hear him because I was embarrassed. The confession seemed to be tearing something loose inside him. I was so ashamed. I pretended not to know him sometimes when my friends were around. I told people he was in automotive services, instead of just saying he was a mechanic, like there was something dirty about the word. I made excuses for why he could not come to school events, why he drove an old truck instead of a new car, why our house was smaller than everyone else's. He looked up at Keanu and Walter, his face contorted with grief and guilt that had been festering for years. The day before my college graduation, my father was working a double shift. He wanted to earn a little extra money so he could take the whole family out for a nice dinner after the ceremony. He had this plan, this whole speech about how proud he was, how everything he had sacrificed was worth it to see me walk across that stage. Derek's voice broke completely. He was under a car, replacing a transmission, when he had a massive heart attack. By the time the other guys found him, by the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. He died on a concrete floor, covered in grease and transmission fluid alone. 54 years old, and he died the same way he lived, working himself to exhaustion for a son who was too ashamed to even acknowledge him in public. The showroom had gone completely silent. Jennifer at the reception desk was crying openly now. Marcus and David stood frozen, witnessing the complete collapse of the man they had feared and resented for years. And I never got to tell him. Derek whispered. I never got to tell him that I was proud of him. I never got to apologize for all the times I was ashamed. I never got to say thank you for every sacrifice he made, or I love you, or any of the things a son should say to a father who gave him everything. Walter stepped closer, his earlier anger dissolving into something that looked almost like recognition. That is why you hated me, he said quietly, understanding dawning in his pale blue eyes. Not because of who I am, because of who I reminded you of. Derek nodded miserably, his carefully constructed identity as a sophisticated professional stripped away to reveal the wounded child underneath. Every time I see a working man, every time I smell motor oil or see calloused hands or notice grease under someone's fingernails, I see my father. And I remember how ashamed I was. I remember what a terrible son I was. And it makes me so angry, so full of self-hatred, that I just, You push them away. Keanu finished, his voice gentle now. You push them away before they can remind you of what you lost. Before they can make you face the guilt you have been carrying all these years. Derek nodded again. Beyond words now. Keanu was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had heard. The story was painfully familiar in some ways, different in others. But the core of it, the grief and the guilt and the desperate attempt to escape a past that could never truly be escaped, that he understood completely. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. I understand loss, Derek, more than you might imagine. I lost my best friend River when we were both young, when we thought we had forever to do all the things we talked about doing. I lost a daughter who never had the chance to draw her first breath, who I held for just a few moments before she was gone. I lost someone I loved more than I ever thought possible, taken from me suddenly and violently in a way that made no sense. He stepped closer to the broken young man. Grief does terrible things to us. It twists us, poisons us, makes us lash out at the world, because we do not know how else to process the pain. It makes us push away the people we love and hate the people who remind us of what we have lost. But here is what I have learned, Derek. Through all those years of loss and all those nights of wondering why any of it happened. He put his hand on Derek's shoulder. The only way to honor the people we have lost is to become better because of them, not worse. Your father spent his life serving others. He fixed their cars so they could get to work and earn their livings, so they could take their kids to school, so they could live their lives. That is not something to be ashamed of. That is something to be incredibly proud of. He turned to Walter. This man did the same thing for 40 years. He kept the world running with his hands, just like your father did. And he came here today not because he wanted to show off or prove anything to anyone. He came here because he loved his wife, and he wanted to honor her memory by making the dream they shared come true. Derek turned to face Walter, seeing him clearly for the first time, not as a reminder of his shame, but as a reflection of his father's dignity. "I am so sorry," he whispered. "I am so sorry. I was not really angry at you. I was angry at myself, at everything I never said to my father, at the shame I carried for so many years, at the boy I was who could not see what a good man his father was until it was too late." Walter was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, creased and faded from years of handling. "Is this your father?" he asked gently, holding out the image. Derek looked at the photograph Walter was offering, but it was not a picture of Thomas Sullivan. It was a picture of Linda Gibson, smiling radiantly in a hospital bed, holding a newborn baby in her arms. "That is my wife," Walter said softly, "and that is our first son, Michael, the day he was born, 32 years ago." She was so happy in that moment, so full of love and hope for the future. She thought that baby was the most perfect thing she had ever seen, and she was already planning what kind of man he would become. He tucked the photograph back into his pocket with reverent care. "I was ashamed of my work sometimes, too, you know. Wished I could have given Linda a bigger house, a nicer car, the kind of life I thought she deserved. I used to apologize to her for my dirty fingernails and my grease-stained clothes, for the way I smelled when I came home after a long shift." He met Derek's eyes with a steady gaze. "You know what she told me whenever I said that?" she said. "Walter, you give me everything I need just by coming home to me every night. I do not need a mansion. I need you. I need your hands that fix things and your heart that loves me and your eyes that light up when I walk into a room." Walter's voice grew stronger, more certain. "She said that the oil stains on my clothes were proof that I was a man who worked hard and provided for his family, and that she would not trade them for all the clean white shirts in the world. She said my calloused hands were the most beautiful hands she had ever seen because they had built a life for us." Tears were flowing freely down Walter's weathered cheeks now, but he was smiling through them. "Your father was not ashamed of what he did, Derek. I guarantee you that. He was proud. Proud to have a skill that made him valuable, proud to support his family, proud to send his son to college, so you could have opportunities he never had. The shame was never his. You put it on him because you were young and foolish and did not understand yet what it means to be a man." Derek broke down completely, sobs racking his body. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I would give anything to take it back, to tell him I was proud of him, to thank him for everything he did." Walter did something that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around the young man who had humiliated him just an hour before, holding him tight as decades of suppressed grief poured out in choking sobs. "I forgive you," Walter whispered, "and I think, if your father is watching from somewhere up above, he forgives you too. Because that is what fathers do. They love their sons, even when those sons make mistakes. Even when those sons are too young and too foolish to understand the sacrifices being made for them. A father's love does not come with conditions, Derek. It just is." Keanu watched the two men embrace, and he felt something shift in his chest. This was why he had founded Arch Motorcycle, not for the profits or the prestige, but for moments like this. Moments when human beings connected through their shared experiences of loss and love and the possibility of redemption. When Derek finally pulled back, wiping his eyes with his sleeve like a child caught crying, Keanu spoke again. "I am not going to fire you, Derek." The young manager looked up in disbelief. "What? But after everything I did, everything I said." "You made a terrible mistake," Keanu acknowledged, "and there will be consequences. But I do not believe that punishment alone leads to growth. What I believe in is redemption, in giving people the chance to become better versions of themselves." He pulled out his phone and made a quick call. When he hung up, he turned back to Derek. "There is a community center in Watts that runs a free auto repair program for low-income families. People who cannot afford to take their cars to regular mechanics, who depend on their vehicles to get to work and take care of their families. The program teaches basic car maintenance, helps people fix their vehicles, provides a valuable service to people who need it most." Derek nodded slowly, beginning to understand where this was going. "For the next 6 months, you will volunteer there every Saturday and Sunday, You will work alongside the mechanics, get your hands dirty, learn what it means to serve people who do not have much but still need help getting from one day to the next. And you will do it with humility and gratitude, remembering that the man who taught you everything you know about work ethic and sacrifice was a mechanic just like them. Yes, sir, Derek whispered. I will. I promise. Whatever it takes. And one more thing. Keanu's voice softened. I want you to visit your father's grave. Bring him flowers. Sit with him for a while. Tell him all the things you never got to say. It is not too late to honor his memory, Derek. It is never too late for that. Derek nodded, tears still streaming down his face. I will. I have not been there since the funeral. I could not face him. But I will go. I will tell him everything. Keanu turned to Walter, a warm smile spreading across his face for the first time since this whole ordeal began. Now, I believe you came here to buy a motorcycle. Walter's eyes widened in disbelief. But after everything that happened, you showed more grace and forgiveness than most people would have shown in a lifetime. Keanu gestured toward the gleaming machines on their pedestals. Take your time, look at every model, ask any questions you want, and when you are ready, I would be honored to personally help you choose the perfect motorcycle for your journey. Walter approached the nearest bike, the KRGT1, with the same reverent appreciation he had shown before his humiliation. But this time, no one tried to stop him. This time, he ran his calloused fingers over the chrome and carbon fiber without fear, without shame, without feeling like he did not belong. This one, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. This is the one Linda would have wanted. I can feel it. Keanu nodded. The KRGT1. 1,240 cubic centimeters of pure American engineering. Designed for the open road, for long journeys, for riders who understand that getting there is just as important as arriving. It is a machine built for people who love to ride. He reached out and took the envelope of money from Walter's hands. Your money is no good here, Walter. Walter blinked in confusion. What do you mean? I mean that Arch Motorcycle is giving you this bike. Free of charge. As a gift from one dreamer to another, from one person who understands loss to another who carries it with grace. I cannot accept that. Walter protested, shaking his head. I saved this money fair and square. 30 years of honest work. I want to pay for it. I need to pay for it. Keanu smiled gently. Then use that money for your trip. Stay in nice hotels instead of sleeping in your tent. Eat at good restaurants instead of gas station food. Take your time crossing the country instead of rushing from place to place. Give yourself and Linda the adventure you both deserve, the one you both earned. Tears were flowing down Walter's weathered cheeks again, but these were tears of joy rather than sorrow. I do not know what to say. Say you will send me photographs, Keanu replied. Say you will let me know when you reach the Grand Canyon and the Rocky Mountains and that little beach town in Maine. Say you will live your dream fully and completely without holding anything back. I will. Walter promised. I swear I will. Every sunset, every mountain, every moment of joy. Keanu turned to Derek, who stood nearby looking shocked by the turn of events. Derek, I want you to personally oversee the preparation of this motorcycle. Make sure everything is perfect. Check every system, every component, every detail. And when Walter is ready to begin his journey, I want you to be here to see him off. I want you to shake his hand and wish him well and remember this moment for the rest of your life. Yes, sir, Derek replied, and there was something different in his voice now. Something that sounded almost like respect, almost like hope. Over the following weeks, a transformation took place at Arch Motorcycle that no one could have predicted. Derek threw himself into his volunteer work at the community center with unexpected dedication. He arrived early every Saturday and Sunday morning, often before the doors were even unlocked, and he stayed late into the evening, long after his official hours were complete. He learned to change oil and rotate tires and diagnose engine problems, getting his hands dirty in ways he had avoided for years. He discovered that there was satisfaction in physical labor, in using his hands to fix things, in the simple pleasure of solving a mechanical puzzle and seeing a car drive away running better than when it arrived. The other mechanics at the community center were skeptical at first. They had seen his type before, rich kids from the nice side of town who showed up for a few weeks to fulfill some community service requirement or pad their resumes. They took photographs for their social media accounts, talked loudly about how meaningful the experience was, and disappeared as soon as the novelty wore off or something more interesting came along. But Derek kept coming back. Week after week, month after month, he showed up at 6 in the morning and did not leave until the work was done. He listened more than he talked. He asked questions instead of giving orders. He treated every customer, regardless of their background or appearance, with the dignity and respect they deserved. One Saturday morning, about 3 months into his volunteer service, an elderly woman brought in an ancient book that was making alarming noises. She was clearly nervous, clutching her purse with white, knuckled hands and apologizing repeatedly for bothering anyone with her problems. Derek recognized something in her eyes, a fear of being judged, a worry that she did not belong in a place like this, that she was somehow less worthy of help than other people. He approached her with a gentle smile that would have shocked anyone who knew him from his days running the art showroom. "Good morning, ma'am. My name is Derek. What seems to be the trouble with your car today?" The woman relaxed visibly at his friendly tone. "I do not know much about cars," she admitted. "My husband always took care of that sort of thing. But he passed away last year, and now it is just me, and I heard this terrible grinding sound this morning, and I was afraid the whole thing might fall apart while I was driving to church." Derek thought about his father, about all the people Thomas Sullivan had helped over 32 years of service. People just like this woman, people who depended on their cars to live their lives and had no idea what to do when something went wrong. "Well, you came to the right place," he said warmly. "Why do not you have a seat over there where it is comfortable? Maybe get yourself a cup of coffee, and I will take a look. We will figure out what is wrong and get you back on the road in no time." He spent 3 hours working on that Buick, replacing worn brake pads that had ground down to metal, fixing a loose heat shield that had been rattling against the exhaust system, topping off fluids that had been neglected for too long. When he was finished, he walked the elderly woman through everything he had done, explaining each repair in simple terms, so she would understand what to watch for in the future. "How much do I owe you?" she asked, reaching for her purse. Derek shook his head. "Nothing, ma'am. This is a free service for the community. That is the whole point. But surely I can give you something. For your time, at least. You worked so hard." Derek thought for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph he had recently added to his home screen. It was an old picture of his father, Thomas Sullivan, standing proudly in front of the garage where he had worked for 32 years, his hands on his hips and a smile on his smudged face. "You see this man? This was my father. He was a mechanic his whole life, just like the folks here. He passed away a few years back, and I never got the chance to tell him how proud I was of him. I spent too many years being ashamed of what he did instead of grateful for who he was." The elderly woman nodded sympathetically, reaching out to touch his arm. "What you can do for me," Derek continued, "is go home and call someone you love. Tell them how much they mean to you. Do not wait for the perfect moment or the right words. Just call them and let them know while you still can." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "That is beautiful advice, young man. I will do that. I will call my daughter tonight. We had a falling out a few years ago over something silly, and I have been too stubborn to reach out first." She reached out and squeezed Derek's grease-stained hand. "Your father raised a good son. I am sure he knows that, wherever he is." After she left, Derek sat alone in the garage for a long time, thinking about everything that had changed since that terrible day at the showroom. He had visited his father's grave the week after his confrontation with Keanu and Walter. He had brought flowers, white roses that his father had always loved, and he had sat on the grass beside the headstone for hours, talking to a man who could no longer answer. He told his father about the shame he had carried for so many years. He apologized for every time he had pretended not to know him, every time he had been embarrassed by his work clothes and his calloused hands. He thanked him for every sacrifice, every double shift, every missed holiday that had been given so that Derek could have a better life. And he promised, with tears streaming down his face, that he would spend the rest of his life trying to make his father proud. Meanwhile, preparations for Walter's cross-country journey continued at Arch Motorcycle. Keanu personally supervised the customization of the KRGT-1, adding a special holder on the tank where Walter could secure the velvet pouch containing Linda's ashes. He installed upgraded navigation systems and a satellite communicator for emergencies, so that Walter could call for help from anywhere in the country if something went wrong. He even had the bike painted in a custom shade of green that Walter said matched the exact color of Linda's eyes on their wedding day, a deep emerald that seemed to glow from within when the light hit it just right. When the motorcycle was finally ready, Keanu called everyone together for a small ceremony at the showroom. Walter arrived wearing new riding gear that Keanu had also provided, including a helmet decorated with a small green heart on the back, right where Linda would be riding. Derek was there too, his hands still bearing traces of grease from his morning volunteer shift. He looked different now, softer around the eyes, more at peace with himself. The angry young man who had thrown an elderly stranger onto the sidewalk seemed to have been replaced by someone gentler, someone capable of growth. "Before you go," Keanu said, "I want to give you something." He handed Walter a leather-bound journal with the Arch Motorcycle logo embossed on the cover. "Write down everything you see and feel on your journey. The sunsets and the mountains and the little diners where the coffee is terrible, but the pie is perfect. Write it all down so you can remember it forever. And when you reach the end of your trip, send me the journal. I would love to read about your adventure with Linda." Walter accepted the gift with trembling hands. "I do not know how to thank you," he said. "Any of you. When I walked into this showroom, I thought my dream was about to come true. When I was thrown out, I thought it was over, that the universe was telling me I was foolish to ever want something so beautiful. But what I found instead was something even more valuable than a motorcycle. I found people who reminded me that kindness still exists in this world." He turned to Derek, who could not quite meet his eyes. "I want you to know that I meant what I said. I forgive you. Completely and without reservation. What you did that day was wrong, but it came from a place of pain that I understand better than you might think. We all carry wounds, Derek. The question is whether we let those wounds poison us or whether we use them to become more compassionate toward others." Derek finally looked up, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I am going to be different," he promised. "I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to make you proud, and my father proud, and everyone else who gave me a chance when I did not deserve one." "You already have," Walter said gently. "The man I see standing here today is not the same person who threw me out of this showroom. That man was lost in his grief, drowning in shame he did not know how to process. This man has found his way home." He reached out and placed his weathered hand on Derek's shoulder. "Your father is watching. I truly believe that, and I believe he is smiling right now, seeing the son he always knew you could become." The two men embraced, former enemy and victim now bound together by shared grief and hard-won understanding. When they parted, Keanu stepped forward. "One more thing before you go, Walter. I was wondering if you would be willing to let me join you for the first day of your journey. Just to the edge of Los Angeles. I would like to ride beside you and Linda as you begin your adventure." Walter's face broke into the widest smile anyone had ever seen. "I would be honored," he said. "Linda would have loved that. She always said you seemed like a genuinely good person in all those interviews, someone who had not let fame change who he really was. I guess she was right about that, like she was right about most things." Keanu laughed, a warm sound that filled the showroom. "She sounds like she was right about a lot of things." The next morning, two motorcycles pulled out of the Arch Motorcycle parking lot as the sun rose over the Los Angeles skyline, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Keanu Reeves rode ahead on his personal bike, a custom build that he had designed himself over many months of collaboration with the Arch team. Behind him came Walter Gibson on his new KRGT-1, the velvet pouch containing Linda's ashes secured safely to the tank where she could feel the wind and see the road ahead. They rode in comfortable silence through the awakening city, past the morning commuters stuck in traffic and the coffee shops just opening their doors. past the street vendors setting up their carts and the joggers finishing their early runs. They rode until the city gave way to open highway, until the buildings shrank to nothing in the rearview mirrors, and the endless California desert stretched out before them like a promise. At a scenic overlook with views that seemed to go on forever, Keanu signaled for them to pull over. The two men dismounted and stood together at the edge of the overlook, watching the sun climb higher into the clear blue sky. The desert spread out below them, vast and ancient and utterly indifferent to the small dramas of human life. "This is where I leave you," Keanu said. "Your journey with Linda is yours alone to take. But I wanted to be here for the beginning, to see you off properly." Walter nodded, his eyes bright with emotion behind the visor of his helmet. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. For the motorcycle, for the gear, for giving Derek a second chance instead of destroying him. But mostly for reminding me that people can be good. That kindness is still possible. That dreams do not have to die just because the world tries to crush them." Keanu smiled. "I learned a long time ago that the universe has a way of testing us. It throws obstacles in our path, challenges us, breaks us down to see what we are made of. But the people who survive those tests, the ones who come out stronger on the other side, they are the ones who refuse to let the darkness win. They are the ones who keep believing in goodness, even when they have every reason not to." He reached out and shook Walter's calloused hand. "You are one of those people, Walter." Linda knew it. "And now I know it too." He climbed back onto his motorcycle and started the engine. "Send me those photographs," he called out over the rumble of the engine. "And write in that journal. I want to know everything." "I will," Walter promised. "Every sunset, every mountain, every moment of joy." Keanu nodded once, raised his hand in farewell, and roared off down the highway, disappearing into the distance until even the sound of his engine faded to nothing. Walter stood alone at the overlook, his new motorcycle gleaming in the morning light, his wife's ashes secure in their velvet pouch against the emerald green tank. "Well, Linda," he said softly, his voice carrying on the desert wind, "this is it, the adventure we always dreamed about. I wish you were here to see it with your own eyes, but I know you are here in spirit. I can feel you with me, just like I always could." He climbed onto the KRGT1, felt the powerful engine thrumming beneath him, and pointed the motorcycle east toward the rising sun. "Let us go see the Grand Canyon, sweetheart, and then the Rocky Mountains, and then that little beach in Maine where the lobster is fresh and the sunsets last forever." The open road stretched out before him, full of possibility and promise. Behind him, in Los Angeles, Derek Sullivan walked into the community center garage, ready for another day of volunteer work. On his workbench, he had placed a framed photograph of his father, Thomas Sullivan, smiling in his grease-stained work clothes. "Good morning, Dad," Derek said softly. "I hope you are proud of me today. I am going to try to make you proud every day from now on. I am going to be the son you always deserved." He picked up a wrench and got to work. 6 months later, Walter Gibson pulled his motorcycle into a small parking lot overlooking the Atlantic Ocean in Bar Harbor, Maine. The journey had taken him through the painted desert of Arizona, where the rocks glowed red and orange in the setting sun, like they were on fire from within, through the towering peaks of the Rocky Mountains, where the air was so thin and pure that every breath felt like a blessing, through the endless wheat fields of Kansas, where the wind made waves in the golden grain like an ocean made of light, through the rolling hills of Pennsylvania and the ancient forests of Vermont, until finally, at last, he reached the sea. The Atlantic Ocean stretched out before him, vast and eternal, its waves crashing against the rocky shore with a rhythm that spoke of all the journeys that had come before and all the journeys yet to come. Walter dismounted and walked to the edge of the cliff, carrying the velvet pouch that had traveled with him across an entire continent. "We made it, Linda," he whispered. "We've finally made it. The Atlantic Ocean, just like we always talked about. It is even more beautiful than we imagined." He opened the pouch and let a small portion of the ashes drift out over the water, watching them catch the wind and scatter across the waves until they became one with the sea. "A piece of you belongs here now," he said, "in this beautiful place. And a piece of you is at the Grand Canyon, and in the Rocky Mountains, and in a dozen other places along the way. Everywhere we stopped, I left a little bit of you behind. So now you are everywhere, Linda. Everywhere we dreamed of going, you are there. Tears streamed down his weathered face, but they were tears of completion rather than sorrow. I love you, he said. I will always love you, and when my time comes I will find you again. I know I will. And we will ride together, wherever souls go, for all of eternity. He stood there for a long time, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed too beautiful to be real. Then he pulled out his phone and took a photograph. He sent it to Keanu Reeves with a simple message. "We made it. Thank you for making our dream come true." A few minutes later, his phone buzzed with a reply. "Beautiful. Linda would have loved it. Safe travels, my friend. The road is always waiting." Walter smiled and tucked the phone back into his pocket. He looked out at the ocean one more time, feeling the wind on his face and the salt spray on his lips, and the profound peace of a promise fulfilled. Then he walked back to his motorcycle, climbed on, and started the engine. The journey was not over. It would never be over, because every road led to another road, and every destination was just the beginning of a new adventure. Walter Gibson rode off into the sunset, his wife's ashes secure against his heart, his spirit finally at peace. And somewhere in Los Angeles, at a community center in Watts, Derek Sullivan finished his 6 months of volunteer service and decided to keep coming back anyway. Not because he had to, but because he had finally found something that made him feel whole. He opened his own automotive training program for at-risk youth, teaching young people from disadvantaged backgrounds the skills they needed to build successful careers in a field that had once brought him so much shame. He named it the Thomas Sullivan Academy, after the father whose legacy he had once tried to escape and now celebrated every single day. The program grew quickly, funded in part by anonymous donations that Derek suspected came from a certain famous benefactor who preferred to help without recognition. Within 2 years, the Thomas Sullivan Academy had trained over 200 young mechanics, helping them find good jobs with living wages and benefits. On the wall of his office at Arch Motorcycle, where he still worked as showroom manager, Derek hung a plaque that read, "Every person who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. This is not just a policy. This is who we are." And underneath the plaque, he placed a photograph of his father, smiling in his grease-stained work clothes, looking for all the world like the proudest man who ever lived. Because he was. And his son, at long last, was proud too. Thank you for following this story! Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you, and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we're preparing for you.